It's been 3 weeks of grand Egyptian adventure for Atet and his brothers. They're with their dad on a boat trip down the Nile River to deliver some important scrolls to Pharaoh Ramses II. Since Atet is missing scribe school, his teacher told him to keep a journal about his trip.
Dear Journal, I can't wait to tell you about the day we just had. See those pyramids behind me? Pretty fantastic, huh? We spent the whole day exploring them. And I'm here to tell you, they're even more fantastic in person. For one thing, they aren't just big, they are enormous. Dad says that they are as tall as 50 Egyptian houses stacked on top of each other. I think that they are even taller than that. Not only that, but Dad says that the pyramids are aligned perfectly to the north, south, east, and west. Now, in our modern day, we could do that easily. After all, we are very advanced here in the time of Pharaoh Ramses. But these pyramids are old, way older than my granddad's great-granddad. They were built more than 1,000 years before I was born. If that isn't old, I don't know what is. While we were looking around the pyramids, I couldn't help but wonder, why were they built? Well, Dad told me the pyramids are basically giant tombs. Remember Osiris, Lord of the Next World? We Egyptians think that when people die, they are just passing over into the other world to join Osiris. So it's important to send them off the best way we know how. First, we wrap them up to preserve their bodies, and then we bury them with all kinds of good things they would need in the next life, like food, games, clothing, or scrolls. Simple people have simple tombs, but the pharaohs want to continue to live a rich life on the other side. They like to take a lot of their treasures with them. All that gold and jewelry is pretty tempting for a thief. So the pharaohs kept making bigger and more complicated tombs to try to trick the robbers. But there's another reason for the pyramids, too. Our pharaohs are god kings. We count on them to rule here on earth, to organize our cities and towns, to lead our armies, and to build our temples. But one of the most important things the pharaohs do is communicate with the gods on our behalf. The pyramids are aligned so their tips point directly up into the center of the heavens. This is to help the pharaohs reach the gods and put in a good word for us. Dad says it took a lot of trial and error to figure out how to build the pyramids. A really long time ago, pharaohs were buried in a tomb like this. It's called a mastaba, a word meaning bench. Mastabas were made of mud brick, just like our houses. They worked just fine for pharaohs for hundreds of years. But by the time Pharaoh Zoser ruled, Egypt had grown to be a powerful and rich country. People must have thought that Pharaoh needed a bigger, better tomb. Lucky for Pharaoh Zoser, he had a really smart man working for him. Imhotep was Zoser's top advisor. He was also the chief physician and the royal architect. Dad says Imhotep changed the world forever. He had the idea to build the pyramids with stone instead of mud brick. Imhotep's pyramid for Zoser started out as a giant mastaba, with smaller mastabas stacked on top. Because he used stones, Imhotep was able to stack a lot higher than he could with mud brick. His step pyramid is almost 200 feet high. Dad says this was the biggest building back then, 10 times taller than anything else around. Pharaoh Sneferu was just a kid when the step pyramid was built. As soon as he became pharaoh, he started building his own pyramid. Good thing he didn't give up easily. It took a lot of practice to design the perfect pyramid. Sneferu's first attempt failed when workmen put smooth limestone blocks on the outside walls. The blocks weren't attached too well and slid right off. So, Sneferu built the second pyramid. This time, the architect, who was Sneferu's son, by the way, used larger blocks for the outside walls. These stayed on much better. But soon the walls began to crack, because the pyramid was built on shifting gravel and sand. Halfway up, they changed the angle, but it was still too unstable, so Sneferu abandoned the bent pyramid too. Sneferu's last pyramid was smaller than the first two, and the angle of the slope was reduced, but it was a complete success. They called it the Shining Pyramid. The pyramids at Giza were built by Sneferu's son and grandsons. It's easy to see how much they learned from their dad's early design mistakes. But as we explored today, I realized that it took something besides good design to build the pyramids. It took a lot of effort. See the Great Pyramid? It's made of more than 2 million blocks of stone. Dad told me each block weighs at least 2.5 tons, as much as a full-grown elephant. Some blocks near the bottom weigh as much as 15 tons. That's nearly 7 elephants. Dad told me the Great Pyramid took 23 years to build. 23 years divided by 2 million blocks. That means that they had to move a block at least as heavy as an elephant every few minutes. Not only was moving the stones amazing, but they fit together perfectly. All of these years later, and you still can't slide a piece of papyrus in there. That's some very careful work. And when they built it, they had to keep it aligned all the way to the top. If one side was off by even an inch, the points of the top wouldn't line up. But they do line up, because the people who designed and built the pyramids were master craftsmen. So, who were the master pyramid builders? Why, we Egyptians, of course. Dad says that more than 100,000 men worked on the Great Pyramid. 20,000 peasants at a time would come, usually during the season of the flood. They were called by the pharaoh to do their civic duty for Egypt. Every family had to send someone. They lived and worked in gangs of 100, divided into groups of 10. Can you imagine organizing everything for the workers every day? Think about it. 20,000 people needed a place to sleep, food to eat, and clean clothes to wear. Dad says the job of organizing the workers for the pyramids was nearly as hard as the job of building them. The pyramids make me really proud to be an Egyptian.
But wait till you see her obelisks, one of the great engineering achievements of the ancient world. Obelisks are one of the greatest achievements of the ancient world. Hatshepsut was especially proud of the ones she erected at Karnak Temple. If you want to see just how big an obelisk is, there's one lying unfinished in the quarry, still attached to the granite. Every Egyptian obelisk was cut from the same granite quarries in Aswan, about 150 miles south of Thebes. Granite was the only stone strong enough for such a tall monument. This baby weighs as much as 3 jumbo jets. It was an incredible feat to quarry an obelisk. You can still see the channels where workers pounded for months to free it from the quarry. Hatshepsut's 2 obelisks were completed in just 7 months, and she recorded their transportation to Karnak Temple on the walls of her temple at Deir el-Bahri. The obelisks were dragged on sleds to the riverbank and placed on one barge end to end. It must have been an incredible sight. But once at Karnak, the obelisks had to be erected, and that wasn't easy. They were 97 feet high and weighed 350 tons each. There's no written record of how the Egyptians raised obelisks. The current theory is that they were lowered down a ramp onto a large granite base. The obelisk caught on a groove on the base, and then was pulled upright with a series of ropes. Want to know what's holding it up? Nothing. Isn't it amazing that the only thing holding an obelisk on its base is its own perfect balance? That's precision for you. On the base of her obelisks, Hatshepsut wrote these words.
She made them as her monument for her father Amun, lord of Thebes, presiding over Karnak, making for him 2 great obelisks of enduring granite of the south. The summits of Electrum, the best of any country, are seen on both sides of the river.
Hatshepsut had every right to be proud. Recently, for a documentary, a team up against the television deadline tried to erect an obelisk much smaller than Hatshepsut's. It was cut out of the quarry with modern machinery, but only manpower was used to position and raise the obelisk. In spite of weeks of effort, expert advice, and hundreds of helpers, they couldn't do it. It still lies in the desert, on its side, testament to ancient Egyptian skills. The score? Hatshepsut 10, modern ingenuity 0. Hatshepsut's ultimate obelisk is the unfinished one in the quarry at Aswan. It weighs nearly 1,000 tons, 3 times the weight of the other obelisks. But this didn't faze Hatshepsut. She was confident it could be quarried, moved, and erected. But it cracked while the workmen were pounding it free from the rock and had to be abandoned. It wasn't Hatshepsut's technology that failed. It was the granite. If you want to understand Ramses, you have to go to Abydos, the most sacred place in all of Egypt. For thousands of years, pilgrims brought offerings here to gain favor with Osiris, the god of the dead. Today, all that remains of the offerings is the Hill of Pots, jars, now broken, carried by the pilgrims. Ramses' grandfather was the first pharaoh of his dynasty. They were a military family, new to the royalty business. So when Ramses' father, Seti, wanted to show that they were part of the establishment, he built a temple on the sacred ground at Abydos. He assembled the finest craftsmen in the land to give the people this dazzling display that once again, Egypt was great. Seti wasn't just building a temple, he was making a political statement. You can expect great things from my reign. This was Ramses' father. It was a family of overachievers, and Ramses intended to do even better. And he did. When he became pharaoh, Ramses built a temple so awesome that it would become his logo forever and an icon for all of Egypt. Ramses was only in his 20s when he began to build Abu Simbel. It's in Nubia, past ancient Egypt's southern border. It was a unique project. Most temples were built from blocks of stone, fitted together, and then carved. Abu Simbel was sculpted out of a mountain. New rock-cutting techniques had to be developed. Artists were lowered from the top of the mountain on scaffolds to paint an enormous grid that served as a guide for the sculptors, who then carved the 4 67-foot statues of Ramses, seated on his throne. But why build such an incredible monument in such a remote place? There was never a large Egyptian population there that could worship at the temple. It was pure propaganda. Ramses wanted everyone to be afraid of him. Nubia was Egypt's source of gold, and the temple was an awesome reminder to Nubians of Ramses' power. Anyone entering Egypt from Nubia would have to sail past the temple with its 4 colossal statues of Ramses staring down. But then, if a Nubian stopped to visit the temple, he was met right at the entrance with impressive carvings of bound captives, many of them Nubians. Once inside, the visitor could see Ramses leading the army in battle, the reins of his chariot tied around his waist, shooting arrows at the enemy. It was great drama, but it didn't end there. Back in the innermost part of the temple, the Holy of Holies, there are seated statues of the gods Amun-Re, Ptah, and Re-Harakhti. With them, exactly the same size, is Ramses the Great, a god among the gods. Quite an ego, huh? And Ramses didn't stop with just one temple at Abu Simbel. He built a second one for his beloved queen, Nefertari. They were married as teenagers, and he clearly adored her. Above the entrance to her temple, he had an inscription carved, calling her, "She for whom the sun doth shine." Nice, isn't it? In the 1920s, when America wanted to commemorate its great presidents, Ramses at Abu Simbel was the inspiration for Mount Rushmore in the Black Hills of South Dakota. Even with modern tools and engineering techniques, it took 20 years to complete the 4 colossal heads of the presidents. Just about as long as it did to finish Abu Simbel.